There is a good amount of holidays in Russia that celebrate important and most fascinating events happened throughout history, and many of them appeal to commemorate those who sacrificed their lives to defending their native land. But only a handful of them can be given an additional meaning of being sacred. One of them is definitely May 9th, the Victory Day, the victory in the Great Patriotic War. On May 8, 1945, in Karlshorst, Berlin, at 21:20 local time, the definitive text of the German Instrument of Surrender was signed by representatives of the three armed services. German armed forces surrendered simultaneously to the Supreme High Command of the Soviet Red Army and the Allied Expeditionary Force. French and US representatives signed the document as witnesses. This marked the official ending of the World War II, the extinction of Nazi Germany, and, as a result, the establishment of the official Victory Day. Every year on May 9th at 10 o'clock in the morning, the official parade and marching by military units take place in every major city in Russia. The Victory Parade in Moscow takes place on Red Square. The military units of the first lines march down the square in wartime uniforms, equipped with World War II gear in the memory of the Red Army. Different vehicles of the World War II era are also present and drive down the square. The following marching units present contemporary uniforms, military vehicles, and innovative technologies. The parade is also accompanied by nationwide known songs written during the years of war, which are full of glory, grief, love, and passion. But the Victory Day itself is more than just an official parade in the memory of the Great Patriotic War. On this day, people gather around with their relatives, celebrate the victory of their fathers and grandfathers. TV programs broadcast wartime documentaries and war dramas. Some veterans are happy to go out and talk about war stories to a younger audience. They share incredibly illustrative and sometimes almost unbelievable moments of their lives and lives of their comrades. Some stories themselves are worth making films of them, and I actually wonder how many of them we've never heard of. Other veterans prefer rather not to talk about the war at all, because some things cannot simply be shared verbally, and maybe for good reasons. Visiting graves of the deceased and paying respects to their sacrifices is what everyone, without regard for generation, shares on this day. No doubt, it's safe to say that both types of behavior are worthy of understanding and respect. Surely, 70 years after the war have left its mark on the understanding of the importance of the Victory Day. It's possible to say that it blurred the emotional nerve to some degree. At least 2 generations of people have grown since then. A lot of school children get to know about the war mainly from textbooks, rather than from close relatives and actual participants of those events. To some degree, the Victory Day became a ritual and official tradition in the eyes of some people. It acquires some sort of layer where buying war-themed stickers and symbolic ribbons is nothing more than a part of consumerist culture, to give a person the feeling of being involved in the celebration. As an example, one can see stickers on vehicles with phrase "To Berlin" or symbolic ribbons on any pieces of your casual items. And just as this ritualistic culture started to spread, at the same time, something truly remarkable was developing in the minds of several people from the heart of Russia, in Siberia, in the city of Tomsk. In 2011, 3 journalists from Tomsk who were working in a local media platform at the time decided to organize an event which would push the Victory Day celebration way beyond the level of traditional marching parades and spectacular speeches pronounced from their rostrums. It would be an event where citizens would come out in the streets with the portraits of their relatives who participated in the Great Patriotic War. But this event wouldn't be necessarily tied to soldiers of the front line. As we all know, any activity during the wartime was valuable, from a squad commander to a private trooper digging a trench, from a nurse on the battlefield to a professional surgeon at the military hospital, from a tank driver to a factory worker sweating day and night constructing this tank. Any person who suffered those horrible years of losses, daily risk of being shot, who spilled his blood defending the country, or somehow survived that horrible period as a child of war, deserves to be commemorated. Because these are the stories of each individual family. The idea was thought out by Igor Dmitriev, who shared it with his colleagues Sergei Lepinkov and Sergei Kolotovkin, who became the first coordinators of the event. May 9th has always been a day of processions and parades, and I decided to ask myself, why my grandfather, a veteran of war, cannot join this parade? That's how our idea was born. In 2012, Tomsk witnessed 6,000 people crowd, walking down the main streets of the city, carrying portraits of their fathers and grandfathers. It was decided to name this event the Immortal Regiment. A year later, over 120 coordinators in different cities and settlements were engaged in this manifestation. In 2015, the Immortal Regiment spanned over 5 countries and over 450 cities around the world. But instead of making the official organization out of this event and patent the idea, the initiators strongly decided to make the Immortal Regiment as less politicized as it could possibly be. Sergei Lipnikov says, "You know, this is a story of horizontal, equal relationships in nation. This event was born in province, in distant regions, Tomsk, Tula, then Urupinsk. Our idea was to make the regiment the starting point of communication between people. We live at the moment where we are all divided, and the junction points have to exist. If they vanish, everything goes to nothing." But it is also important to mention how this idea was spreading towards different geographical regions in the span of 5 years. It would be right to note what kind of risks it faced during its development to fully comprehend how influential the Immortal Regiment has become. It took several years to completely establish the movement. The fundamental principle of the movement was to set up purely non-commercial initiative. The initiators didn't even come out with a symbol idea for the Immortal Regiment, giving at the full discretion to cities and towns to decide. Later on, people came out with the idea of a crane with a star at the background. It was especially amazing since it reminded people of the beautiful poem Cranes by Rasul Gamzatov, which later was set to a song. It is only natural for government officials or any other power-wielding forces of trying to derive benefit from such a massive manifestation, career-wise or politics-wise. Some of them took a quantity over meaning approach, which led to a couple of unpleasant events. Several occasions happened in different regions where schoolchildren were informed that they would carry banners with portraits of veterans whose names they didn't even know. This event has to be frank, voluntary. It is a story of each one's family, and it is based on personal memory. People shouldn't walk with banners of veterans they've been given. A boy has to carry a portrait of his granddad, or any other close relative, if only he's not an orphan. As any mass event, which the Immortal Regiment definitely is, it demands government institutions to set up these processions. It was suggested to put this event into expansion item on every city budget to emphasize the quantity of people joining the movement. That is where the movement was split between 2 groups, one that was with the symbol of a crane, another one with St. George symbol, which started cooperating closely with Moscow authorities. The Immortal Regiment cannot be a marketing platform. It is prohibited to use any corporate, political, or any other symbols during this event. The regiment is about millions of lives before and after us. Only this way, without yielding to temptations, we can make the regiment a truly nationwide tradition. Those were the risks of bringing the movement in a state of bureaucratic system, but as the time shows, all of that faded away pretty rapidly. And I think the most fascinating fact about this story is that, in their vast majority, people in Russia have caught the initial idea of what the Immortal Regiment was set up as, a family celebration. And that's where, undoubtedly, the initiators have succeeded in transferring this splendid idea through all possible obstacles. And that is why the Immortal Regiment spreads rapidly across the globe and becomes not only a nationwide celebration, but a worldwide movement. In 2019, the Immortal Regiment spanned over 115 countries. It included participants in Cuba, Brazil, Australia, India, Canada, a number of cities in France, Paris, Montpellier, Marseille and Strasbourg, and many cities in the United States as well, from Washington, D.C. to Chicago, from Seattle to New York, and even Anchorage in Alaska. As to the regiment being a platform, certainly a platform of communication and unity. It is a reminder of the absolute evil that mankind has ever produced. It is a living reminder of the evil that was overthrown by the price of millions of lives. It is a reminder of the acts of heroism, self-sacrifice, and the immortal memory about these people, a sign that it is unacceptable to falsify the history. On the first celebration of the Victory Day in 1945, it took about 30 minutes for units who came back from the war to march down the square. It was estimated that if all the deceased soldiers of the Red Army would have marched down the square, it would have taken them 19 days and nights of straight and continuous marching. If you add civilian casualties to the equation, 27 million people, it would have taken 57 days of non-stop marching down the square. Almost 2 months of constant marching to the grips of death. And when you see millions upon millions of people on May 9th, when you see this endless ocean of people walking in the Immortal Regiment, you see each life behind it. You see a tragedy of each family, you see a joy of every family. And I do think that it is not coincidental that the way people are walking is very similar to the Christian tradition of carrying gonfalons. The Immortal Regiment is the day when the deceased march alongside their descendants. It is a perfect manifestation of denial of death. It is the day when it becomes clear that death is no more.